Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today, we explain Prophets Joshua chapter 16 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We're continuing our journey through the historical text, and right now, we're focusing on a really critical moment. The Promised Land is literally being divided up among the tribes. And dividing this land, it was an absolutely monumental task for Joshua. We aren't just talking about, drawing arbitrary lines on a blank map. Not at all. We are talking about assigning permanent ancestral inheritance to an entire nation. A nation that has just spent decades wandering in the wilderness, followed by years of intense conquest. So this is a defining moment. It's the moment of inheritance that's going to set the entire geopolitical landscape of Israel for centuries to come.
Here's our quick roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the macro allotment. Then, we'll zoom in to the micro borders. After that, we'll tackle the major exception at Gezer. And finally, we'll wrap up with some key ideas, lessons, and a quick chapter recap. Let's dive right in.
Section 1. The macro allotment for the children of Joseph. We're looking at verses 1 through 4 here. At this point in the narrative, the major wars of conquest have largely wrapped up, and Joshua has this incredibly complex job of distributing the land by lot. Here, the spotlight hits the descendants of Joseph. Now, as a quick historical refresher, Joseph had two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Because of a special blessing from their grandfather Jacob back in Genesis, Joseph basically got the double portion, the right of the firstborn. So his two sons each became their own distinct full-fledged tribe. But before breaking down their individual lands, the text gives us the massive overarching boundary of their combined territory.
So how exactly do you divide a promised land? It's a massive geographical puzzle. Verse 1 starts us off right at a very famous natural boundary, the Jordan River. It specifically pinpoints the Jordan at Jericho at the waters of Jericho on the east. Boom, a precise, undeniable starting coordinate. From there, the text says the border goes up from Jericho, straight through the hill country, into the wilderness, all the way to Bethel. Now, Bethel means house of God in Hebrew, so a highly significant spot spiritually. But geographically, this path is wild. It starts way down in the Jordan Valley, near Jericho, literally one of the lowest places on earth, and climbs aggressively up into the steep, rocky, totally demanding wilderness of the central hill country. Imagine the physical exertion just to walk this line. It's a harsh, imposing natural boundary.
Step 1 starts down at the Jordan near Jericho and pushes up. Step 2 brings us into that harsh hill country we just talked about, landing at Bethel. From there, verse 2 tells us the border goes out from Bethel to Luz and passes along to the border of the Arkites to Ataroth. That sheer elevation change makes it incredibly defensible. Then we hit step 3. Verse 3 says the border goes down westward to the territory of the Japhletites, as far as lower Beth Horon. Now, Beth Horon was a famous super-strategic pass in the ancient world. It basically controlled all military and trade access from the coastal plains up into the mountains. From there, the border reaches the city of Gezer and extends all the way west, ending at the sea. This gives Manasseh and Ephraim a huge, continuous, strategic block of land right across the middle of the country.
And notice that the Great Sea, mentioned here in verse 3, that's the Mediterranean Sea. It provides a completely unmovable western boundary for their massive inheritance. In the ancient world, the sea was basically the edge of the earth. You really can't argue with an ocean, right? It forms the perfect, undeniable wall on the west. Verse 4 then perfectly wraps up this macro section, just stating, "And the children of Joseph, Manasseh, and Ephraim took their inheritance." The grand boundary is set. But as you're about to see, the text doesn't just leave it at the macro level.
Section 2. The micro borders for the tribe of Ephraim. Now we're zooming in on verses 5 through 9, shifting from the wide-angle lens of Joseph down to the specific, localized allotment purely for Ephraim's family. Joshua is making sure everyone gets exactly what they need.
The narrative deliberately narrows in here. It separates Ephraim's specific tribal borders from that larger joint territory we just traced. And listen, drawing these micro borders wasn't just administrative paperwork. This was a matter of life and death. Your family's entire survival depended on knowing exactly where your farmlands, your defensible hills, and your critical water sources began and ended. Manasseh gets their detailed borders later in chapter 17, but here in chapter 16, Ephraim gets the spotlight. Verse 5 tells us the border of their inheritance eastward was Athroth Adar, going up to upper Beth Horon. We're moving from the broad whole house territory directly into the specific family lands. Verses 5 through 7 trace Ephraim's eastern and northern borders, honestly, like following GPS on an ancient map.
From Atroth-Adar, the border heads west, with Mikmethod on the north. Then it turns eastward to Taanath-Shiloh, passing it on the east of Genoa. From Genoa, it drops down to Adaroth and to Nara, eventually reaching all the way back down to Jericho and hitting the Jordan River again. Now, we don't need to hunt for deep mystical meanings here. We just need to know what these places were. Mikmethith, Taanath-Shiloh, Genoa, these were well-known ancient city-states and landmarks. Think of them like modern county lines or major highways. They were physical boundary markers that everyone recognized. By playing connect the dots with these cities, the text draws a closed loop on the east and north, making absolutely sure Ephraim's land is undisputed.
Next up, verse 8 maps out the western trajectory. Starting from a city called Tapua, the border goes westward to the brook of Kanah, or the Kanah Ravine, and once again finishes at the Great Sea, the Mediterranean. Let's pause on that term, the brook of Kanah. In Hebrew, a brook or ravine here is a wadi or nahal. If you know the ancient Near East, a wadi is this dry riverbed that violently fills with rushing water during the winter rains. Because it carves such a deep, permanent trench into the rock, it makes a brilliant, unmistakable natural boundary line. The name Kanah actually relates to the thick reeds that grew there. The verse wraps up this boundary by saying, "This is the inheritance of the tribe of the children of Ephraim according to their families." It's a completely binding legal record.
But check out this fascinating little detail in verse 9. Even with those strict borders, the Ephraimites were also granted specific, separated cities along with their surrounding villages, located right smack in the middle of the neighboring territory of their brother tribe Manasseh. Why that? Well, human populations aren't always perfectly symmetrical to the plot of land they draw, right? This shows us that these borders had a vital element of practical flexibility. It made sure Ephraim had enough land for everyone to live and farm. And honestly, it really highlights the close, cooperative relationship between these two half-tribes of Joseph. They were totally willing to integrate their towns for the survival of their extended family.
Section 3, the exception at Gezer. Just as we finish cleanly mapping out all these borders, verse 10 throws us a massive curveball. Up to this point, everything has been about perfect planning and divine inheritance. But then, human compromise enters the chat.
Verse 10 reveals a really stark historical compromise. The text says, "They did not dislodge the Canaanites living in Gezer. To this day, the Canaanites live among the people of Ephraim, but are required to do forced labor." Think about that. Despite having these perfectly clear borders, and despite explicit commands to completely clear the land to prevent future idolatry, the tribe of Ephraim totally dropped the ball. They failed to drive out the Canaanites in the strategic city of Gezer.
Instead of securing the land like they were supposed to, Ephraim compromised. And it was all about economics. They imposed forced labor or task work. The Hebrew word is mas, meaning compulsory servitude. Ephraim had grown militarily strong, so they realized, hey, we can easily control these guys in Gezer. They let them stay, but forced them to work. On the surface, maybe it looked like a smart, profitable decision. I mean, why fight a tough battle when you can just tax them and get free labor to build your own stuff? But wealth and ease are incredibly tempting, aren't they? Deep down, it was a profound moral failure. They chose temporary convenience over the long-term security of their borders.
And the text doesn't let them off the hook. It deliberately points out that they lived there unto this day. That specific phrase is a giant red flag to the reader. It means this failure had permanent echoing consequences. Gezer remained a massive thorn in their side for generations. They essentially baked a permanent vulnerability right into the edge of their territory, all for a little temporary convenience. That uncompleted task didn't fade away. It became a difficult, lasting part of their daily reality.
Section 4. Key ideas and practical lessons. Let's take all this ancient geography and transition into how it actually applies to us today. This isn't just an old map. It's a mirror reflecting human behavior.
Now, we've been using the Peshat approach today. That means we're sticking strictly to the plain, literal meaning of the text, the who, what, where, and why. We aren't doing any deep dives into Kabbalah or mystical symbolism. And the beauty of this is that even by just looking at the plain historical and geographical facts, we can still pull out some incredibly profound life lessons.
We can basically distill this whole chapter into 3 real-world takeaways. Number 1, claiming your inheritance. Number 2, the absolute danger of incomplete obedience. And number 3, the long-term reality of compromise. Let's break these down real quick.
Lesson 1 is simple, but so powerful. Claim your designated territory. Just like Ephraim was handed these specific, carefully mapped borders from the Jordan to the Mediterranean,
You have to recognize and step into your own responsibilities. You have a territory in your life right now. Maybe it's being a leader in your family, setting healthy boundaries at work, or really taking ownership of your personal growth. You literally have to map out your goals and claim what is yours, just like Joshua told the ancient tribes to walk the land and take ownership.
Lesson 2. Please don't settle for almost. The whole mess at Gezer shows us that stopping short or compromising just because it's convenient leaves massive obstacles right in the middle of your life. Ephraim did all this hard work conquering the land, but when it got tough, or when free labor looked really appealing, they compromised. Think about how that works for us. If you leave 10% of a bad habit hanging around because knocking it out completely feels like too much work, that remaining 10% will drain you. It's exhausting. Incomplete obedience left Ephraim with a problem that lasted unto this day. When we leave toxic habits or negative influences unresolved, they don't just sit quietly. They become permanent drains on our potential.
Section 5, Chapter 16 recap. Let's do a really quick summary of our journey today to make sure we've locked in this step-by-step walkthrough. It was detailed for sure, but super meaningful.
First, we mapped out the grand macro territory for Joseph's descendants in verses 1 through 4. We watched it stretch all the way from the deep Jordan Valley across the mountains to the Great Sea. Then, verses 5 through 9 zoomed us into Ephraim's highly specific borders, tracing the wadis, the ravines, and those flexible separated cities. After that, verse 10 hit us with the historical failure at Gezer, where Ephraim chose forced labor over actually finishing the job. And finally, we unpacked what that means for us today, the absolute necessity of follow-through and avoiding the trap of partial obedience.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative question. Where in your own life have you accepted a Gezer instead of completely finishing the work? Where are you tolerating a compromise instead of fully claiming the territory you've been given? Give that some thought this week. Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.